So today, welcome back. Like I said, for day two, this is the plenary number 3, defending the land. We have three very amazing speakers. Dana Tija Tram of Arctic Circle Strategies, former chief of the Vuntagwinjin First Nation and a former colleague of mine at the leadership table. I know you'll be very impressed with who I always called DTT. Charles Morvan, and I think Andrew Robinson. So sorry, I don't know. Yeah, so it's just Charles, or sorry, Andrew. Nisgaalism's government, and Richard Payton of Quikiktani Inuit Association. So I now invite Dana Tija Tram, Arctic Circle Strategies, to come on up.
The career advice you're never given. You know you've made it when a chief gives you a nickname at the tables. Vangwinzi Shulaknai. Good morning, all of my relations. My name is Dana Tija Tram. I was the former chief of the Vuntagwinjin First Nation, currently, director at Arctic Circle Strategies. I want to give thanks to our host nations, our brothers and sisters of the Algonquin, but also for the opportunity to speak here to you today. It's always difficult when you come from an oral tradition and peoples with 30,000 years of presence in their lands. So when asked to speak today about defending land rights, automatically I go to my grandfather, an intrepid hunter and trapper on his lands of the Vuntagwinjin, the people of the many lakes, 80 miles north of the Arctic Circle, 60 miles east of the Alaska border. Gwich'in Nation, of course, going from northeast Alaska through the Yukon Territory into the NWT. And if I could sit with him and ask him about what land rights meant and defending land rights, we would have an interesting conversation. We're now in a generation and a time that looks to quantify this in common law with our treaty partners. I think one of the major fallacies of land claims that 95% of the population non-Indigenous may have trouble understanding is that Indigenous rights and Canadian rights are pretty much the same in a lot of ways, and any Canadian could understand inheriting their parents' farm under common law. Land claims is almost like a postmarker, eking out a reservation and rights pre-existing to the nation of Canada. So when we speak today, and along much of the advocacy on behalf of the Vuntagwinjin First Nation, which we've enjoyed many successes, this is the dichotomy that we face quite a bit. When we go down to Washington, D.C. as the Gwich'in Nation to advocate for the protection of the porcupine caribou herd, the last largest land animal migration on Earth of 230,000 ungulates that simply convert the lichens and cotton grasses of the coastal plain in Alaska into nutrients. These plants are living in a reciprocal and renewable system with the sun. The caribou, they unearth these nutrients, and in an ebb and flow of a 2.1 million year old evolutionary system drive Arctic ecosystems. So in the United States, and under the 2017 Jobs Act and tax cut, a bill by the United States, the first ever mandating the development of oil and gas in this coastal plain, Gwich'in go there. And we go there and speak to them of this renewable system. If we're willing as a world, because the caribou don't see these borders, Gwich'in don't recognize those borders. And as a people that are brothers and sisters with Vats'ai Caribou, that do not see that difference, in fact, half of our heart is a caribou heart. We just happen to be animals that can speak English. So when we go down to the confines, the halls of one of the most influential and powerful nations in the world, we warn them that if you're willing to trade this renewable energy system for 10 years of oil and gas, then what we're signaling is that we're willing to sell the infinite for the finite. These are the dangerous auspices that we come up against when we talk about defending land rights. And as Indigenous peoples, we do it for non-Indigenous peoples as well, for their children. This is what's been difficult on the front lines. And yes, we enjoy successes for all of our grandchildren and generations to come. I just wish that this knowledge was ready to be received with the partners that we speak with. But our successes continue like grapes on a vine throughout generations. We continue, and I as well, inheriting a lot of this work in working with the good people in the United States and across the country. It took the Gwich'in Nation, the nations of the Na-Cho-Nyak Dun, and the Tronda-Gwich'in to protect land use planning, bringing it all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada in 2016, where the Supreme Court sided with these nations. The Indigenous peoples knew that we could not get 100% protection of these lands, so we had tabled 80% protection after over 5 years of consultation, where the Yukon government unilaterally took the document and put it right in the garbage and said, we consulted you. There began a long, almost decade-long battle all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, where land use planning was protected and stood by the Supreme Court justices of this country. This echoes and reverberates through the world. And that day, I don't think I'd ever bared witness to anything like that in my life before. And it didn't make headlines in this country. The Peel watershed, 5 river systems, over 64,000 square kilometers, is now today the second largest contiguous protected boundary landmass in the world, only second to Antarctica. Future generations will look back at this cathedral of landmass where the animals can help make this transition in a changing climate. They can look back to this, all Canadians, and enjoy these successes for all of our grandchildren. This investment with land that I'm speaking about, that Indigenous people experience wholeheartedly without compartmentalization, because for our treaty partners and those who have not had the honor of being raised by a river or being raised by caribou, having their children teethe on the bones or drink the broth, is quite simply that land rights are animal rights, are human rights, are Indigenous rights, are land rights. When we look at the modern systems today, I'll be the first to admit, when the legal realm touches these subjects, it's no longer in our hands anymore. Not politicians, not anybody. But in my opinion, it's their law that is outdated, not Indigenous forms of knowing and being with these lands. And in the time of climate change, it only echoes the timeless principles that Indigenous peoples discerned and were taught by the lands. But also we must remember that these same lands also taught us to bank on diversity and reward cooperation. With this in mind, the Wanda Gwich'in have recently completed an over 2,000 bifacial solar panel project, a farm, that now generates 24% of the community's electrical needs. Because if we want to talk about self-determination, we first need to talk about self-reliancy. This move towards energy sovereignty is a beautiful hand in glove of Indigenous principles with new technologies. But what most people don't understand, and beneath the thin veneer of this project, lies the electricity purchase agreement. We have to look at money as a form of energy as well. And my community, a village of 250 people, the only fly-in community in the Yukon, were purchasing electricity at about 78 cents per kilowatt hour, some of the highest in the country. What we were paying for was for a corporation to fly diesel in a plane, to burn in a generator in our community, which had been operating since the 60s. We now created an electricity purchase agreement that diverts that. Our community now generates not only clean solar energy right among the berry patches where our elders continue to harvest, but we're also generating $450,000 a year by selling sunlight to a corporation at 64 cents per kilowatt hour. They're saving operations and maintenance. They're saving transportation fees. We're selling their shareholders sunlight. This signals a major departure in the trajectory of our relationship. And as First Nations look towards different appendages to realize our rights, this again is synonymous, and in my mind, also aligned with our principles of community, reciprocity, and respect. If a small, humble First Nation, a village that under certain eyes in certain decades may have been easy to look down upon, with a single project can deal with 1/4 of their electrical needs, can show that as communities, we do have self-determination, a self-determination that they wield towards reciprocity and respect with the land, and created community in the Yukon through these energy projects, then anyone can do it. Because I don't want to hear about the economic difficulties or inconveniences of Indigenous and land rights. And now I'm waiting for the time where Indigenous economics can quantify the real value of leaving these systems be. Because not a single representative of Canada can articulate to me what a single pound of salmon is worth. But if you take these away from our people, we will weigh on your national systems. You'll have to send food to our communities. You'll have to deal with health care because of the diabetes increase. The land has always held on to our languages, to our dances, to our culture. The land is our greatest teacher, and Indigenous peoples took this lesson because nature is the ultimate technology. Nothing that man has ever created today has been as efficient, renewable, or as deft as what nature does naturally. This is why it's our greatest teacher. And in the epistemology of our disposition in a nation that suffers from multiple personality disorder, I look forward to when we can all, as today, we can all go to a university to learn about the universe, but also bring our treaty partners into turning their universe into a university and read the chapters of the lands, to hear the animals and the plants and the rivers and the land speak in a language before English and before words. And then maybe all of our elders and future generations can sit down together and we can leave the legal realm to figure their things out on their own, because we had settled them, as the Great Wampum Belt of the 1600s precluded us, in my opinion, as the first legal founding document of this country, to do so together. Merci.
Thank you very much, Dana. Did you all hear the feedback that he was getting? His greatest critic in the back of the room was giving him feedback. That's his baby talking back to him. You hear daddy talking, right? Incredible. So I now call upon Mr. Andrew Robinson from Nisga'a-Lissam's government.
I'm a rather shy public speaker, so that was really an awesome presentation. I do have a slideshow that you can watch, because I'm here from a perspective of defending the land and looking at climate adaptation and mitigation, because on many occasions you can see the breadth of our land as Nisga'a people is 2,000 plus square kilometers of land. And the land itself is both diverse and very, very vast. We have very steep mountains, very, very, very fast-flowing rivers. We have volcanic lava fields, volcanoes, massive alluvial fans. The techies in the room and some of the lawyers in the room will love this. We sit on one of the most chaotic tectonic plates in probably the world, and that's why the Nass Valley is so beautiful. As a young child sitting in the university, I used to actually love reading about the 1700s volcano and the songs and stories we had of the volcanic eruption, and our people covering their eyes and singing Flamasak and singing these songs about the volcanic dust coming down and how our people died in communities, and then looking at the data from the 1700 Alaskan volcano and looking at the slip strike of the coastal area and actually what probably brought about our volcanic eruption in the 1700s. It wasn't that long ago that you actually compare scientific data to the oral stories and start to be able to build a far more vast network of actual land and traditional knowledge, and how it actually could inform us better in regards to what could happen, and then how the volcano and its thermal vent was progressing down the coast. But I'm digressing into volcanic eruptions and bad things that could happen. I do want to preface it based on a couple of things. So we've had a couple major earthquakes on the coast of British Columbia. I believe you felt them in the Yukon. The Haida Gwaii quake, and then you had also another quake in southeast Alaska that sent tsunami warnings out across British Columbia in like 2012, 2013, and then another one in 2015. When you live in the province of British Columbia and there's a natural disaster, it's real fun when you live in a rural community. We all learn this, and we learned it really quickly that day, is that we all contacted EMBC because we live on the coast. We live in tidal estuaries that traverse 39 kilometers up a river. So the tide comes upriver 39 kilometers at about 3 knots. And we had the earthquake, and everybody goes, oh no, tsunami. And so we call EMBC, hello, Emergency Management British Columbia. Yes, this is the Nisga'a Village of Lakalzup and the Nisga'a Nation, emergency management number 0047. Yeah, yes, thank you, please hold. Put us on hold. For 45 minutes, we're like, gee, we're gonna be dead if we wait any longer. So we learned not to trust anybody else. And this story will go to a couple of other stories. We've also had some very highly educated engineers and people from the federal government, oceans or fisheries or whatever they were from, went to probably Laval, got a really good degree. And they came to that place right there, Kincolith. That exact place. They were sitting in that office right there after the tsunami. And the guy said to us, he goes, "Why are you guys worried about tsunami? There's no water out there." We looked at him and we said, "The tide's out, dude." So we knew right there we were dealing with federal officials and we were dealing with provincial officials that were not informed about the reality of what it was to live on the land. And so we knew from a climate adaptation and mitigation standpoint that we needed to inform them through their data collection methods and through their processes that climate adaptation and mitigation and climate change were actually real for us. And so that's what we did. We actually were quite engaged with the two southern communities as a nation and with the nation overall of looking at the actual flow rates in the whole Nass River and how much the Nass was adjusting to its seasonal changes and how quick its flow was going, but at the same time, how the flow was going backwards and forwards and how the flow would be impacted if we actually had what they called a 200-year tsunami event, would be the red map that you see right now of the coast, similar to the Alaskan quake. But at the same time right now with climate change in 2050 targets of an increase of 0.50 of a foot, you're in trouble. You add another 0.5 to that foot, we're in trouble. We went to a provincial government in British Columbia meeting, and we were all sitting in there as reserve communities along the coast of BC, the community of Lac Alzap and the community of Kincolith. And the provincial government had the city of Vancouver, the city of Victoria, the city of Delta, the city of Richmond, the Vancouver International Airport, all at this meeting. And guess who they were listening to? Not us. And it's a real issue. And so I think it's really important to understand how you can begin to address these things. And how we began to address these things within the Nisga'a government was we said, okay, the province doesn't know, the feds are all over in Ottawa, and it seems like no one else really cares. You know what we can do? We can self-govern ourselves. They gave us the tools for this. I was a senior administrator for one of the communities for 10 years. I'm a reformed administrator. I'm just a manager now. I used to work in the government of BC. I've done a bunch of stuff in my life, but I really like what I do now because it's fun. And I think that one of the things you got to always keep in work is keep it exciting and keep it fun. But when you get into these types of events and start to be able to make the changes that we need to make, it's nice to inspire in self-governing administrations the opportunity to think for yourself. I don't need to talk to a federal official. I don't need to talk to a British Columbia official to say, the Nisga'a Village of Lac Alzap would like to amend its land agreement. All those in favor? Let's have a public meeting. And then we had a public meeting. We said, okay, no one can build along the waterfront anymore because we're going to recede away from the water instead of actually investing heavily in infrastructure in the front because it's going to cost us too much in the long run. If you need to move your houses or you don't want to move your houses, we'll provide you another piece of property in a different location. How does that sound to everybody? Everybody, well, what about the smokehouses? Well, you could build another smokehouse. Your smokehouse is rotten anyway. You know, you need a good one. So we decided to move. And other communities were saying, okay, why are we investing in infrastructure along coastal areas when we don't need to? Take the project and move it up 100 feet. Everybody goes, well, that doesn't make sense. We've lived along the river the whole time. I said, don't worry, the river's coming to you. And technically it is. It's adjusting itself. The flow rates are adjusting, the ocean, the atmospheric rivers. They used to call them pineapple expresses. They're adjusting themselves. I'm sharing stories of climate change with you and adaptation because our people live through it every day. This was the story of the atmospheric river. They said, gee, it's raining hard. And we went up the road and we said, it's raining really hard. And there was a river coming down the road. There was like waterfalls coming off, hitting the highway from everywhere. We had 120 millimeters of water in like 3 hours. It was like, you could go out there, shampoo your hair and stand in the water. It was that warm. But then we told everybody, hey, yeah, this is not right. It's happened for like 3 days now. Our dike got torn out. No, that's a 100 in every 5 year, one in every 500 year event. Well, that 500 years is right now. Because 500 kg chunks of rock are being scoured underneath a dike and lifted and thrown like pebbles. And so we had engineers come from Canada and British Columbia again, and they said, how did these rocks get here? I said, I magically picked them up from up there and walked them down here. And he goes, oh, this is strapping. He goes, how? And he goes, can we fly this creek? And then they finally started to tick, 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 tick. Basically, this creek would have an entranceway through a canyon about this high at high rates. When the atmospheric rivers came, it was probably about 10 to 15 feet past its high rate. Basically flowed over the banks of the cliff, tore out all the trees, and came down moving at like 45 miles an hour. And was tremendous amounts of water. But it only was going to happen once every 500 years. Then the following week, the whole valley got pummeled by the same amount of rain. And we're like, hey, it's raining again. And they said, no, it can't be that much. We said, yeah, 119 millimeters of water this time. 1 millimeter shy. And then the Vancouver event happened. Chilliwack flooded. The whole Fraser Valley flooded. And no one cared about us again. So you learn to live by yourself. And you learn to govern by yourself. The same way you've learned to govern by yourself, and the same way you've learned to make adjustments with your land and your territory yourself. That's how we've done it also. And I think that what Village Lands and what the National Land Strategy for us offers is it offers you the capabilities to make those decisions yourself with your community. Because our people traditionally made those decisions themselves too, when they would all sit in a longhouse or sit together and say, when Ankida, our ancient village, came underwater, what did we do? We just sit there and watch our stuff float away? I know people think we are dumb. We weren't. We had different villages and different homes for different reasons. We didn't stay in places when the high tides or big waters came. We didn't stay there for all of those things. So I think it's really important that we start to really reflect upon how traditional knowledge is informing things right now. Don't sell yourself short of how our elders, when they come to meetings and they inform us or provide advice to us or provide guidance to us, ask us to talk slower instead of rushing through things because they felt like we were trying to shove stuff down their throats. And then we had to really slow it down to start to address how we were doing that. And in the midst of this, we live in a coastal rainforest. So all the winds and weather and everything else go away and, gee, it's nice. Oh, it's 33 degrees. What was it in Nyanch, like 38? 38 degrees for a week? 38 degrees Celsius in a rainforest for 1 week straight. On the North Pacific Ocean in Southeast Alaska, it was 31 degrees on the ocean. And we were sitting on a boat going, I don't want to go fishing, let's go leave. We were fishing at 4 in the morning and getting home by like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning because it was too hot to fish. So when you start to look at that and you start to figure out where you need to find your balances, you start to look at how it is that we could plan as a nation for those balances. Because we also had to put in a Guardians program and a NAS Wildland Fire program to start to protect our upper villages, the Nisga'a village of Gitwansith and the Nisga'a village of Gitlach-Damix. So we had two distinct geographic areas within 120 kilometers, 139 kilometers, one area that could be wiped out by flood, or if there's ever an earthquake, they'd liquefy and sink into the ground. I don't know, but that's what the technologists or scientists would say. And then you'd have the other part that could burn down. So how do you plan for those? You put the teams in place, you advise your systems, and you advise your government as best you can with the data and supports that you have to be able to do the best you can to support all of our people and protect them overall. I think that one of the things that we really enjoyed when we seen that program was that program also helped us during COVID. Most people don't know that in the NAS, we lost a significant amount of people to the COVID-19 virus, and I think statistically it's probably one of the highest rates of death amongst First Nations people in British Columbia. I'm a data guy. I love numbers because they help us make decisions as administrators and staff, and they help us tell government exactly what they need to hear. They don't care about your uncle. They don't care about anything else. They care about numbers. They care about how you can show them how the numbers work. And I really think that when we put the guardians in place in our valley and blocked off our valley from access, it was really to start to protect our elders and start to protect all of our other old people, respected elders and hereditary chiefs. Sorry, yeah, and I come on. I love to make people laugh, but my great-grandmother, she lived my whole life, and she was a wonderful, wonderful lady, and she always used to tell me being an elder is something that you don't get because you get old. She goes, being an elder is something that is earned, and I've always stressed that to all elders that I've known, is that being an elder is something that's earned. It's not just because you get old, it's because of the teachings that you share with others. And I'm grateful for the elders that have guided us in our work, and for all of the ones that were here last night and that guided us to where we are today. So thank you very much.
Last couple of days, we heard somebody say, "You caught me off guard, so I don't have much to say, and I'm a pretty shy speaker." So I think he has no trouble doing this anywhere in the world. Amazing speech. Thank you. So I now call upon Richard Payton from Kikitani Inuit Association.
Well, good morning. Two very tough acts to follow, I think. So two things. Yeah. For me, technology, my brain is in front of me on a computer because it's very difficult to follow such acts in a way that allows you to be an orator in that sense. So I'm very happy to be here and be part of the discussions this week. In particular, it's a pleasure to be back at LCAC because I was actually here for the very first one in 2003, and I haven't been back since. So it's a wonderful opportunity. And I will say, I'm taking pictures because my wife tells me to do these things, and you can listen to your wife, and fortunately my ring is still on my finger.
You're lucky.
So you definitely know you're in a room full of lawyers when you're walking into the conference and the guy in front of you says, "I'm from the Department of Justice." So I'm going to start a conversation with you about our region, the Kikitani region, in a way that will frame who we are and where we're headed in terms of conservation. And so to help frame the discussion I'm sharing with you, when you look at our region, the Kikitani, we are the region that is the furthest north you can go in Canada. For our region, we're larger than the province of British Columbia, and we are more than 2 times the size of California. So just to help frame our small piece of the world. Where I come from, it's in Iqaluit, it's on Baffin Island, and Baffin Island is the 5th largest island in the world. So Inuit as an indigenous group and with others around the world are shifting, I would say, the conversations that we're having around conservation. And we're shifting that conservation effort because we, like everyone else, are faced with significant environmental challenges. Environmental challenges that come from industrialized markets, and because of that, we have seen significant impacts to our cultural continuity and our ability to pass on our knowledge from generation to generation. Those impacts that we're seeing have affected our ability to travel, to access our wildlife, and to pass on intergenerational knowledges between families, between communities, and from within our region. Whether it's international or even domestic tourism, to mining, to persistent organic pollutants, our way of life continues to be threatened as the environment and the climate around us changes. But I would say of significance to us are the serious and often unexpected impacts that are seen to our wildlife, to the abundance, the genetic composition, the behavior, and the survival of the wildlife we harvest. From a global perspective, those changes that we're seeing are starting to impact the significant ecological services that the Arctic provides. Currently, we are storing 26% of Canada's marine-based carbon that is supporting the efforts to cooling the planet and influencing the oceanic and atmospheric currents that surround our region. So it is well known and well documented that Inuit in the region have a long-term dependence on subsistence harvesting. I was fortunate enough this past summer to catch a caribou myself. But Inuit are not a stationary people, and this map shows and demonstrates that we're continually moving, and often at great distances. In our conversations that we have with Inuit, our people, shared stories, or Inuit Kayumet Tukangit, and those stories are essentially significant importance to understanding the travel routes that our region undertakes. And it's demonstrated not only the travel that we undertake, but the importance and extent of use in our region. And that use is based on access to harvest. And like Inuit, animals across the region follow their own migration patterns and have been found to cover thousands of kilometers in very short distances. So when I'm out hunting for a seal in the summer and it goes underwater, I now know that it probably ends up 3,000 kilometers away, wondering for hours why I've never seen it again. It's this knowledge of movement and following our harvest that sustained our way of life for millennia. But we have a path forward. It is through these changes that we're faced with today in the environment and climate change and the understanding of who we are as a people that Kikitani Inuit have identified a clear path forward. Through investments and engagement in conservation economies, and by continuing to do what we have done for millennia, we see a path forward in conservation. And the benefits of a conservation economy are many and overlapping, including securing sustainable local economies rooted in traditional values. And I would say for us, the conservation economy is seen through an Indigenous protected and conserved areas approach, where Inuit are the eyes and ears, where Inuit are leading conservation, and where Inuit are making decisions about conservation. So through an Inuit-led protected and conserved areas approach, we can enable species central to Inuit culture and harvesting and securing the ecosystemic services they provide, such as seal, polar bear, and narwhal, and ensuring that they have a supportive ecology. An Inuit-led conservation approach enables traditional livelihoods, including hunting and sowing, which preserves cultural and governance practices such as country food and distribution of food sovereignty and food security to our people. And to the extent that they allow Inuit to operate sustainably in the blue economy, Inuit-led and protected conserved areas also improve the financial autonomy consistent with the objectives of the Nunavut Agreement. For an Inuit-led approach, we see the need to align decisions about conservation with our communities and to be able to prioritize community well-being. We believe through an IPCA lens, we can play a significant role in the Kikitani region for achieving long-term protection of both marine and terrestrial areas. So this shift means Inuit guidance and direction should start at the community level and allow for conservation at the community level to play a role in the Kikitani region. But we also see the importance of decisions being made by Inuit for Inuit. And so we're taking it from an Inuit lens, and we're putting into place a Kikitani Inuit Stewardship Council. A Kikitani Inuit by Inuit for Inuit only council will be a decision-making body that provides a vision from the regional level that will provide strategic direction and make final decisions on behalf of Kikitani Inuit on all matters related to conservation. I would say that through the Kikitani Inuit Stewardship Council, we see a consistent, holistic approach would be achieved in management of many protected areas in a way that would allow Inuit to continue to benefit from the ecosystem services that they rely on. We know that for us, this council will be the repository of Inuit knowledge and Inuit laws related to conservation. That repository will be collected over time to assist with local community committees in decision-making that supports a holistic but consistent approach to conservation. And I would say from an Inuit lens, it is a significant shift from the colonial constructs that have limited Indigenous space to determine who and where we collectively as a people need to go. It is, however, space that still maintains alignment with government decision-making practices. So key to the conservation economy has been through the eyes and ears of the Guardians program, and for us in the Kikitani region, we call them the Nautik-Sutit. So since 2018, the Nautik-Sutit have been and continue to be cultural ambassadors. They are Inuit knowledge holders. They provide monitoring and research. They are providers of food for the communities in which they live, and they're actively engaged in search and rescue effort. But I would say the Nautik-Sutit are much more than just stewards of a conservation program and of the Arctic's pristine environment. The Nautik-Sutit provide the transmission of knowledge to youth and the delivery of conservation benefits for the region. So an important part of the work that they do is harvesting marine animals such as Arctic char, shrimp, seal, and the harvest that they undertake provides valuable monitoring data, but they do it in a way that allows them to feed the communities and ensure transmission of knowledge from generation to generation. And they are fundamental to the environmental stewardship model that we're putting in place and play a key role in governance and conservation management. Currently, the program spans 5 of the 13 Kikitani communities, and we see that program expanding across the region to all 13 communities. They provide a foundation for training, jobs, and conservation opportunities, and we see that expanding across the region. So the Kikitani Inuit and the region from which I come represents less than 0.05% of the Canadian population. And yet the Arctic, our homelands, represent more than 10% of combined marine and terrestrial conservation targets. Collectively, we're aiming to conserve over 1 million square kilometers of the region. Currently, just over 600,000 square kilometers of existing conservation efforts are in our region through either migratory bird sanctuaries, national marine conservation areas, territorial and federal parks. But we see that shifting in a way that allows the interconnected conservation efforts of our waters and lands through an IPCA lens. So in seeking to meet its national and international conservation targets of 30% by 2030, Canada must meet criteria as to the quality of conservation it is proposing. One clear criterion is the conservation area is permanently protected and conserved. So sustaining Inuit stewardship of lands and waters and a sustainable economy are vital to meeting conservation goals and maintaining ecosystemic integrity over the entire Kikitani region means it requires long-term dedicated funding. And the resources to safeguard the conservation economy is one in which we need to ensure sustainability, as long as there is a desire for sustainability and conservation, long-term protection means long-term funding. I would say certainly part of the tools that we are looking at in terms of a sustainable economy is one in which allows private donors to come forward and invest in the region. But we look to Canada to look at one of the tools that could be allowed to sustain the conservation economy, and that is adopting a conservation or biodiversity credit system. Our resources are managed by Inuit. Our resources are managed by Inuit for the generations to come, and they meet the international targets and the criteria set by the international stage in the way that we manage them. So fundamental to conservation in our region are the foundations of the implementation of the Nunavut Agreement, in particular Articles 8 and 9 of the Nunavut Agreement as it relates to conservation. But I would say fundamental to conservation for the Kikitani region is the ability to implement Article 15. So it's a critical next step for us because within Article 15, 3.7 of the Nunavut Agreement, the Government of Canada has recognized the principles of adjacency and economic dependence of communities in the Nunavut settlement area on marine resources. So we see the need to ensure the establishment of a fisheries reconciliation table to support allowing Inuit to be in the fisheries sector adjacent to our region. Without key direction now from the Government of Canada to shift towards the Kikitani Inuit becoming the key stakeholder in adjacent waters, there's substantial risk to continuing down a path that for the last 30 years has meant historic socio and economic losses to Inuit of about $2.25 billion. And we see those historic losses continuing as long as we don't have access to our adjacent resources. Having said that, we believe that Inuit, through a regional governance model, on-the-ground stewardship, and by working together strategically, we can implement the conservation tools and ensure that through an Inuit lens, one that's grounded in fisheries reconciliation, we can establish a full network of interconnected marine and terrestrial conservation areas, not only for the benefit of Inuit, but for the benefit of Canadians and the global community. Thank you.